This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas. Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping straight into a really critical topic today. Net zero. You hear it everywhere. Balance carbon emissions with removals by 2050. Sounds simple enough, almost like balancing your checkbook, yeah.
Yeah, on the surface, maybe. But what looks like just basic accounting actually hides a profoundly complex challenge.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. The 2015 Paris Agreement set this incredibly ambitious timeline. We're talking about reversing centuries of carbon-fueled progress.
That's centuries.
Yeah, and doing it in just a couple of business cycles. That needs, coordination, innovation, huge investment, and just speed we've never seen before. It's massive.
It really is. And to really get a handle on the sticking points, what's actually slowing us down, we've dug into this really compelling Nature article.
Ah, yes, the 6 roadblocks piece.
Oh, exactly. Net zero, 6 roadblocks to net zero, and how to get around them. And what gives it real weight, I think, is the author's background.
Definitely. These aren't just academics looking from afar. They've been deep in it.
They really have. Shaping strategies, deploying them, working on Microsoft's big carbon negative commitment.
And now they're involved in strategy consulting and private equity, specifically focusing on these net zero investments.
Yeah.
They see it from the ground level, the implementation side.
Which gives such a valuable, grounded perspective, doesn't it? They've been on the front lines trying to make this net zero ambition actually happen.
Exactly. So our goal here really is to pull out the key obstacles they see, explore the fixes they're proposing, basically give everyone a shortcut to grasping the critical issues.
Okay, let's dive in then. The first major hurdle they flag, this one really struck me, this tendency to chase perfection right away.
Ah, yes, perfection over progress.
And how that can actually hold things back.
It's a critical point. They argue that if you bring in super rigid, complex standards too early on, well, it could just discourage companies from even trying to innovate.
Paralyzing, almost.
Yeah, the fear of not meeting some impossibly high bar right at the start. It stops those first crucial steps.
It's like, you wouldn't demand a perfect, feature-complete version 1.0 of some new software, would you? You iterate.
Precisely. And they use that great parallel with early renewables.
Unbundled REC.
Exactly. The renewable energy credits. Now, maybe they don't meet today's really strict standards for direct sourcing.
But they were crucial back then.
Absolutely vital. They created demand, sparked investment, and maybe most importantly, let everyone, producers, buyers, regulators, learn as they went. That early, maybe less than perfect step. Fundamental.
Which feels, well, quite different from how some things are approached now. The article points to the Science-Based Targets Initiative, the SBTI. Apparently, they recently removed nearly 240 companies, and not small ones either.
No, huge ones. Over $4 trillion in market cap combined.
Wow. And the reason was they weren't meeting these really tough criteria in the corporate net zero standard.
Yeah, and the interesting part there, or maybe the concerning part, is the potential fallout. Some companies apparently didn't even realize the deadlines were coming up so fast for the new standards.
Leading to frustration, right? And maybe making them less likely to stick with ambitious goals.
That's the risk. If you feel like you're being penalized or delifted for not hitting what seems like a moving target, well, it can backfire. It can dampen the ambition we need.
Yeah, discouragement instead of drive. So what's the fix they suggest for this perfection trap?
The main thing is shifting focus. Prioritize actual measurable progress. Embrace iteration as just part of the process.
Instead of demanding perfection on day one?
Exactly. They specifically suggest SBTI should build flexibility and this idea of continuous improvement right into their revised standard. Set high goals, yes, but acknowledge that learning and adapting are key. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good, especially early on.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, roadblock number 2. This. Disproportionate focus on indirect emissions, Scope 3.
Ah, the Scope 3 challenge, yes.
Compared to the direct ones, Scope 1 and 2. Maybe just a quick refresher on those scopes.
Sure, happy to. So the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, that's the main standard. Everyone uses splits emissions into 3 buckets. Scope 1. That's your direct emissions. Think factory chimneys, company cars burning fuel. Stuff you control directly.
Got it.
Scope 2 is indirect. It's the emissions from generating the electricity, heat, or cooling you buy and use.
Okay, purchased energy.
Right. And then scope 3, that's the big one. It's basically all other indirect emissions up and down your value chain.
So suppliers, materials, customers using your product, end of life,
Yeah.
everything.
Exactly. Both upstream and downstream. It's vast.
Now, the authors do say Scope 3 accounting is valuable, right? It gives that full picture, drives action across supply chains.
Oh, absolutely. It's important for understanding the total impact. But their argument is that the intense focus on Scope 3 right now, from SBTI, CDP, even some governments, might be a bit unbalanced.
How so?
Well, it might be diverting attention and resources away from tackling the Scope 1 and 2 emissions that companies actually have more direct control over. It's not saying Scope 3 isn't important, but maybe we're jumping too far ahead with the requirements.
Focusing on the hardest part before mastering the more controllable parts.
Kind of. It's about prioritizing where you can make the most immediate impact.
And they had some stats on this, didn't they? About companies hitting targets.
Yeah, pretty stark ones. In 2022, only 7% of consumer companies were on track for their Scope 3 targets.
Wow, only 7%.
Whereas for direct emissions targets, Scope 1 and 2, it was still low, but better, 18%.
That really shows the gap.
It does. And there are good reasons why Scope 3 is so tough right now. First, companies just have less direct control over their suppliers or how customers use products.
Makes sense.
Second, measuring it accurately is, well, it's really hard. Often involves using broad spending data and multiplying by average emission factors. Lots of uncertainty.
Not very precise.
Not really. And third, focusing so much on these huge, uncertain Scope 3 numbers can kind of make companies feel overwhelmed and maybe deprioritize the tangible Scope 1 and 2 cuts they can make.
Like, the Scope 3 number is so big, where do you even start?
Exactly. They even mentioned an SBTI survey from just this year, 2024, where difficulties with Scope 3 were the #1 complaint from companies trying to tackle climate issues. 54% said it was their biggest headache.
That's significant. So what's the proposed way forward then? How do we get focused back onto the direct stuff?
They suggest a kind of tiered system. Prioritize setting clear targets and reporting for Scope 1 and 2 first.
Get your own house in order first, essentially.
Pretty much show real progress on your direct operations and energy use where you have the most leverage. Then tackle the huge complexity of comprehensive Scope 3 action. Build that foundation of direct cuts first.
That feels much more practical, doesn't it? Okay, obstacle 3. This one I found really interesting. The focus on delivery over demand in carbon markets.
Yeah, the delivery versus demand dynamic. This is subtle but important.
Explain that a bit more.
Well, they point out how corporate demand was absolutely key in boosting the renewable energy market. Companies wanted to buy green energy.
To lower their Scope 2 emissions on paper.
Exactly. And the Greenhouse Gas Protocol allowed that. There are these location-based and market-based accounting methods. You could buy renewable energy certificates, sign power purchase agreements.
Even if the specific green electron wasn't flowing directly into your building.
Precisely. You got the Scope 2 credit for supporting the renewable energy generation somewhere on the grid.
Yeah.
But here's the inconsistency they highlight. There's no similar, widely accepted mechanism for Scope 1 or Scope 3 reductions or removals.
Huh. So you can get credit for buying green power that someone else uses, but not necessarily for funding, say, a direct air capture project that verifiably removes CO2 just because it's not happening at your facility.
That's basically the issue they're raising. They use sustainable aviation fuel. SAF is a great example.
Right.
Is it really crucial to track that specific batch of SAF to one specific plane, one specific seat?
Probably not for the climate outcome.
Exactly. What matters is that the equivalent amount of SAF got produced and put into the overall aviation fuel system, displacing fossil fuel. The climate benefit is the same. The key is ensuring the supply is there because there's demand.
So the focus should be less on the hyper-specific logistics and more on creating that market demand, making sure money flows to these solutions.
That's the argument. Their proposed fix is to broaden the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, allow companies to claim credit, legitimate accounting benefits for carbon reduction and removal solutions they contract and pay for across all scopes.
Regardless of tracking the specific physical delivery to their own doorstep, so to speak.
Right. If you're funding verifiable carbon reduction or removal, you should get recognized for it in your emissions accounting. That creates the demand signal, drives investment, speeds things up.
Which is what we need. But they also stressed transparency, didn't they? To avoid greenwashing concerns.
Absolutely crucial. If you're claiming credit for these off-site solutions, you need clear public info about the projects. What is it? Where is it? How is it verified? That builds trust.
Makes total sense. Okay, let's hit the fourth and final roadblock for today. This feels really central to the whole net zero endgame. The lack of flexibility between cutting emissions versus removing carbon.
Yes, reduction versus removal, a really key tension right now.
We know we need both, right? The IPCC is clear on that. Massive emissions cuts and large-scale carbon removal.
No question. Both are essential to limit warming. But the authors warn against setting really strict rules too early about the exact mix.
Why is that?
Because it can stifle innovation. If you mandate a specific ratio of reduction to removal before the removal technologies are fully mature and scaled, you might hinder their development.
And they point back to the SBTI standard again here.
They do. That requirement for companies to cut 90% or more of their emissions before using removals for the last 10% to hit net zero.
They argue that's too strict, too soon.
That's their point. It might be setting the bar too high for removals at this stage, potentially slowing down investment and deployment of technologies we know we're going to need. It's like...
Another analogy coming.
Yeah. It's a bit like saying in the early days of renewables, okay, you must get 90% of your green power from solar before you can even think about using wind or hydro.
Right, you wouldn't have done that. You let them compete and develop.
Exactly. The market, along with supportive policy, figured out the most effective mix over time. Different technologies found their strengths. Solar, wind, hydro, they all grew because they were allowed to compete and prove their worth.
So the idea is we need a similar dynamic approach for reduction versus removal. Let the market help figure out the best balance over time.
That's the core of it. Allow more flexibility. Don't lock things down with rigid ratios too early. Let innovation happen in both areas, cutting emissions and removing carbon. Let the most effective, scalable solutions emerge.
Encourage a whole portfolio of climate actions rather than picking winners prematurely.
Precisely. It could lead to a faster, more efficient path to net zero overall.
Okay, so let's quickly recap those 4 roadblocks from the nature piece. 1, chasing perfection kills progress. 2, too much focus on tricky scope 3 too soon, distracting from direct cuts.
3, getting bogged down in delivery details instead of driving overall demand for solutions.
And 4, not enough flexibility right now between reducing emissions and removing carbon.
And for each, they offer these pragmatic, forward-looking ideas.
The big takeaway seems to be we need to be more practical, more flexible, right?
Absolutely. Prioritize real progress. Focus on what we can control directly first. Use market signals smartly to drive investment across the board, and let innovation flourish in both reduction and removal. It's about getting there faster, not getting stuck on perfect rules too early.
Definitely gives us a lot to think about. And maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Considering these 4 big hurdles we talked through, what single change do you think would make the biggest difference in speeding up this whole transition to net zero? And why? Something to mull over.
A good question to leave people with. It really highlights the complexity, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other podcasts, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.